The Near Enemies of Awakening. This talk looks at how we can awaken our limitless qualities. This week's talk also uses material by the American Buddhist author Jack Kornfield.
What we've been learning over the last number of weeks has been taken in part from a book written by American Tibetan Buddhist monk, nun, Pema Chodron, her book, The Places That Scare You. And we've been looking at some of the concepts in Buddhism that can help us in our spiritual journey. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the founders of Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who founded Unity in the late 1800s, broadly studied the world's religions and were deeply impacted by the religions of the East, particularly Buddhism. And so there is a flavor of some of that teaching and a flavor of some of that practice in even the earliest writings of our founder, Charles Fillmore. Today we're going to be looking at a topic that might be new for some in the room, and it's a topic called near and far enemies. And when I first heard that terminology, it was new to me, and it bothered me a little bit because the very word enemy is not one that I like to think about or to use. But as I started to understand a little bit more what this concept of near and far enemies are, it became a helpful way for me to look at myself and find places and ways to continue to learn and to continue to grow. So as we're looking at the near and far enemies today, we're looking at them because of the goal that we're trying to experience. And that goal is a spiritual awakening. I think that we come here together to learn, and to learn specifically how to wake up spiritually, and ideally how to stay awake more and more consistently. Yes. Notice I said more and more consistently. How many of you find that there's still a gap between what you know spiritually and how you consistently show up? Anybody else share that? Right. So it's like there are moments in my life and periods in my life where I go, wow, I really feel spiritually awake. And then something can happen in my ordinary life experience, and it's like I fall back asleep, and then I wake up again. So it's a journey, and it is a process. So spiritual awakening, how do we want to define that? Well, first of all, I want to say it's of utmost importance that we continue in our own path of awakening spiritually, especially because of the state of the world today. We need to awaken spiritually and stay awake as much as we possibly can. Just read the headlines of the newspapers. My friend and colleague Michael Beckwith calls the headlines of the newspapers the world's prayer requests. So the next time you read something that just makes you want to cry or feel afraid or upset, flip it in your own mind. Here is a prayer need. Let me offer up a moment of prayer. Let me stay awake to the opportunity of prayer. I was doing a little extra checking online last night on this topic of spiritual awakening and what does it look like? What does it feel like? And I came across an article, I just want to share a couple of points with you from it, that I thought offered some good signs of spiritual awakening. And the article comes from a journal called Conscious Lifestyle Magazine, and they suggest that there are 18 signs of spiritual awakening. I'm not going to take all 18 of them because that's not the main topic that I want to talk to you about. But you can go look up the full list if you want. But here are some of the things that this journal identified as signs of spiritual awakening, and see if you can relate to some of them. First one has to do with perception, intensified perception. The ability basically to not be fooled by appearances, the ability to see more clearly, the ability to see more non-dualistically. Increased presence or timelessness, the feeling of being and the practice of being here now, present in this moment, not being pulled and stuck in the future or pulled and stuck in the past. The idea of an awareness of a presence, an energy operative in the universe. And I love how they did not use religious terminology. They didn't call it God or some religious term. They simply said a sign of spiritual awakening is this realization that there is a presence, there is an energy, there is a something beyond us that everything arises from. A feeling of aliveness or connection. Feeling of aliveness or connection. An inner quietness and centeredness and stability. An opening of the heart of compassion. Can you relate to any of those? Yeah, I think these are some definite signs of what happens when we are awakening spiritually. However, what are some of the things that impact that awakening, that seem to delay that awakening, or that seem to be obstacles to that awakening? In Buddhism, they are called near and far enemies to awakening. In Buddhism, it is taught that there are 4 limitless qualities that we are to cultivate, and in the cultivation of these 4 limitless qualities, we begin to be much more spiritually awake. And those 4 limitless qualities are compassion, joy, love, and equanimity. Compassion, joy, love, and equanimity. Say them with me. Compassion, joy, love, and equanimity. So these are the things that, when we cultivate them, we begin to awaken more and expand more spiritually. So these are the things we want to try to practice and embody. And then in Buddhism, in the practicalness of it, it is taught that there are near and far enemies or obstacles to the practice of these. The far enemies are easy to spot because we would say that they are practically the opposite of the quality. So we might say that the far enemy of compassion is cruelty. It's like on the opposite end of the spectrum if you were to put it on a line. But the near enemies are a little tricky, and yet there's still obstacles in the cultivation of those 4 limitless qualities. They are ways of being or thinking or acting that can masquerade like the limitless quality, but they're not really the limitless quality. And so we're going to take a look at what those are. But here's a piece from Oliver Burkeman's website. He writes, "It's ironic that you're as likely to encounter near enemies in spiritual circles as anywhere else. Meditation can be a path to calm and clarity, but hang around meditators for a while, and you're sure to run into a few who seem to be using it to smother issues they should probably see a therapist about. On closer inspection, what they exude isn't calm so much as an eerie sort of blankness." The American psychologist John Wellwood called this spiritual bypassing. Say that with me, spiritual bypassing. Our spiritual practice is not intended for us to bypass life. It's intended for us to be open to the experience of life and be present to it and not shaken by it, to be able to hold the extremes with a sense of clarity and a sense, I believe, of equanimity. The American psychologist John Wellwood called this spiritual bypassing, the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues. It just sounds like a spiritual way of sweeping it under the carpet, and that's not what our spiritual practice is intended to do. So in cultivating these 4 limitless qualities, I know you remember that they are compassion, joy, love, and equanimity. We want to be at least aware of, familiar with, what are the near enemies, the near obstacles to those. So both Pema Chodron, in her book, The Places That Scare You, and then in some of the writings of another very popular Buddhist teacher by the name of Jack Kornfield, they suggest that the near enemy of compassion is pity and despair. Pity and despair. Now think about it for a moment. Pity and despair. Pity sees the hurt or the suffering of another, but it feels different within one than the quality of compassion. Pity seems to carry with it an experience of separateness. Oh, I see that you're suffering. I'm sorry that you're suffering, but boy, I'm glad I'm not there. Right? There's a little bit of that kind of thing that's going on. Kornfield writes, the near enemy of compassion is pity. Instead of feeling the openness of compassion, pity says, oh, that poor person, I feel sorry for people like that. Pity sees them as different from ourselves. That's the kernel piece. That's the part that's really problematic. Pity sees them as different from ourselves. It sets up a separation between ourselves and others, a sense of distance and remoteness from the suffering of others that is affirming and gratifying to ourselves because we recognize, well, I'm not there. Compassion, on the other hand, recognizes the suffering of another as a reflection of our own pain. It's a reflection of our own pain. I understand this. I suffer the same way. It's empathetic, a mutual connection with the pain and sorrow of life. Compassion is a shared suffering. Compassion recognizes that the very same thing that you are experiencing, I could be experiencing too. And I care that you are experiencing it, and I care in a way that I want to be connected to you, not separate from you, feeling like, well, I'm sorry that you're dealing with that, but boy, am I glad I'm not. So pity is a block to the cultivation of compassion. Pema suggests that so is despair. And boy, as we walk that important line of being aware of our world and the issues in our world, and I think we have to be. We should not be putting our heads in the sand. We need to, as objectively assess what's happening around us as we possibly can, and then respond to what's happening out of the wisdom of the mind and the heart, grounded in spiritual practice and principle. But as we walk that fine balancing line of being aware of what's going on, it can be really difficult to not fall into a state of hopelessness or despair. Nod your head if you can relate to that, right? It's like one more bombing, one more attempted terrorist attack, one more suicide, whatever it is, one more, right? We can very quickly feel this sense of overwhelm or despair. And the reason that despair is a near enemy to compassion is because it shuts down our level of power and it closes us off to the realization that though we cannot fix it all ourselves, that we are meant to keep our hearts open to do that which we can do right where we are. That's all that's ever expected of us. Compassion is the willingness to keep that heart open and to keep the eyes open and to extend oneself in care and concern wherever one can, no matter how serious everything else is that's going on around us, to not let the near enemy of despair cause us to stop cultivating compassion. Does that make sense? The second quality, limitless quality, so we've talked about compassion. The second one is the quality of joy. It's interesting, when I spoke about joy a couple of weeks ago, what was shared with me in the staff meeting the following Sunday was that talk was a little challenging for some people. In that talk, I emphasized the importance of cultivating one's own joy by entering into and being aware of the joy of another, and being able to celebrate that joy, and how that's actually pretty easy for most of us to do when the person who's having something great happen in their life is somebody that we love and adore. But the real practice comes as we are willing to push the boundaries and the limitations of that, and to start to include the other, whoever the other is for us. To look at, can we feel joyful when things are working perfectly for our ex, but they're not for us. And so that practice point was, I was told, was a little bit challenging. And yet joy, the cultivation of joy in the Buddhist understanding and practice, is a limitless quality that helps us to be more spiritually awake. So what is the near enemy to joy? And Kornfield suggests, and Pema does as well, that it is comparison and jealousy. Comparison and jealousy. Can you think to a somewhat recent time in your life personally when something good happened for someone else, and it was not at all like the good that you're experiencing in your life? Maybe somebody got a promotion or got a new thing or experienced something really positive, and that didn't happen to you. And you were comparing yourself with where you are and what happened to them. Can you think of an experience like that? If you can, I bet you will notice that there is a direct inverted relationship between the act of comparing and your experience, your individual experience of joy. And so to cultivate greater joy in our lives so that we can remain or open up to greater spiritual awareness and awakening means, I think, that we need to pay attention to when we catch ourselves comparing or feeling jealous. To ask ourselves, what's going on? What's really going on here? And if we look deeply enough, what we will usually find when we are comparing and feeling that we're not stacking up, our good's not as good as somebody else's good, or feeling jealous, that if we're really honest with ourselves, we're living in fear and we're living in a belief in lack. That if you have something good and positive, that somehow that's going to mean I can't. You're very quiet. It's a deep teaching, isn't it? It's a deep teaching. All of this actually is. All of our spiritual work, once we get through some of the very basic, if familiar with some of the very basic teachings in metaphysics, the deeper teachings do require some real commitment and some very deep and honest self-observation. Not the kind of observation where we're beating ourselves up because we notice where we're falling short, but the kind that is rigorous enough to stay alert and awake and to catch ourselves when we're falling short and make a different choice. Kornfield writes, I'm going to move on to the third enemy here. Yeah, I'm going to move on to the third enemy. So the third limitless quality is the quality of love, the quality of love. And what do you think might be the near enemy to love? The far enemy would be easy, hatred, right? What would be a near enemy to love? Huh? Indifference. That's the next one. That's with equanimity, Mike. With love, what's often identified as the near enemy is attachment. Think about that one for a moment. Attachment. Attachment is conditional. Attachment, it's another way of looking at conditional love, actually. I will love you if. I will love you when. True love loves without the if and without the when. And so cultivating this kind of spiritual love, agape love, if you will, universal love, if you will, is the practice of love that's not conditioned upon, I know you, I like you, I agree with you, you look like me, you don't look like me, you think like me. It has no conditions to it, it has no attachment to it. It's not trying to manipulate, it's not trying to possess, it's not trying to get, it's not trying to control, it's not addictive. Listen to some of our love songs. And in particular, listen to country and western love songs. They seem to do it even more. Those love songs are not love songs. Those are near enemy love songs, if you will. They're dysfunctional dysfunctional. They're dysfunctional. Kornfield writes, the near enemy of love is attachment. Attachment masquerades as love. It says, I will love this person because I need them, or I'll love you if you'll love me back. I'll love you, but only if you will be the way I want you to be. This isn't love at all, he writes. It's attachment. And attachment is rigid. It's very different from love. When there is attachment, there is clinging and fear. It's an important piece to notice. When there's attachment, there's clinging and fear. Love allows, honors, and appreciates. Attachment grasps, demands, needs, aims to possess. Attachment is conditional, offers love only to certain people in certain ways. It's exclusive. Love, in the sense of meta love, is a universal, non-discriminating feeling of caring and connectedness. We may even love those whom we may not approve of or like. There are meditation practices on cultivating this kind of love that begin with the process of calling into awareness somebody or something in your life that is so easy for you to love, and then experiencing that feeling and holding that feeling and understanding the texture of that feeling, and then expanding that out to a wider circle, to maybe somebody that you might see them when you go into Starbucks or your bank. They're not even an acquaintance. They're more of a neutral person in your life. And holding that feeling, seeing if you can hold that same feeling as you think about them. And then extending it out yet to another circle. That circle that we might call the circle of our exes. Or the circle of those that wear the name sandpaper to my soul. Or if you were with me a few weeks ago, those Bengali tea boys. Can I hold that? Even in meditation, right? I mean, we're not even talking about being with the person. We're just talking about holding that, cultivating. These are the practices that help us begin to break down our own barriers so that we can awaken more and that we can stay awake more and we can be part of the healing of our relationships around us and our planet, and then taking it as far as we possibly can. So, a little bit about the near enemy of love and the practice of cultivating the limitless quality of love. And the last limitless quality is equanimity. And I have to be honest with you that this is the most difficult one for me to understand and to hold. A friend of mine said recently, boy, when you talked about equanimity a couple of weeks ago, you went for the biggest one on the Buddhist list. And I think it is probably the biggest one. I'll do my best in trying to explain some of it as I understand it. So the quality of equanimity. Equanimity is the ability to dwell equally with pleasure and pain, loss and gain, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. It means that we are able to move equally in both directions as the need arises, without clinging and aversion toward one or the other. That's a big one, isn't it? That's a very, very big one. Equanimity's near enemy is indifference. Because indifference can look like equanimity. I'm reminded when I was in ministerial school, we had a term that kind of relates to this idea of equanimity. We would call, some of us in class were absolutists. And sometimes that absolutism, or that sense of embodying or practicing non-dualistic thinking, actually showed up more as indifference than it did as equanimity. Let me read a piece from Kornfield because I think he explains it well. The near enemy of equanimity is indifference or callousness. We may appear serene if we say, I'm not attached. It doesn't matter what happens anyway because it's all transitory. We feel a certain peaceful relief because we withdraw from experience and from the energies of life. But indifference is based on fear. True equanimity is not a withdrawal. That was really helpful to me. True equanimity is not a withdrawal. It's a balanced engagement with all aspects of life. I found that very helpful. True equanimity is not a withdrawal. It's a balanced engagement with all aspects of life. I may still have my preferences. As a human being, I don't know how you ever don't have your preferences. However, the ability to be in all situations in a balanced engagement with them would be the height of spiritual awakening and spiritual practice. I had an image come to my mind when I was talking to First Service about this idea of balanced engagement, and I'll try to weave this in very quickly as I get prepared to bring this to a close. Do you remember learning how to ride a bicycle, a two-wheel bicycle? How many of you had training wheels on that two-wheeler? Okay, most of you didn't learn with training wheels? Wow, okay, well, I learned with training wheels, and I vividly remember learning with training wheels. And at first, those training wheels were completely equal to the tire, so that it was like my back tire had 3 wheels on it. And then my dad would start to lift those training wheels up, so I have to balance more on the main tire. And when you're learning to ride a bicycle that way, you kind of catch yourself, your body, feels when it's off balance, right? And when you're hitting that one tire, and what do? You make an adjustment, right? And usually you over-adjust, and then you're hitting it on the other side. And that goes on for a little while until suddenly you begin to feel the subtle differences within your body of what balance actually feels like for you. And you also learn how to maintain that experience of balance as you're going down the road where conditions may be changing. Maybe going uphill, maybe going downhill, maybe turning a corner, there may be a pothole or so forth. There's a learning to be engaged with all aspects of the road in a balanced sort of way. You might absolutely prefer that it's flat and smooth with no turns and no hills and no potholes. But because you've learned in your body how to balance, you're able to be responsive to whatever the changing conditions might be without being thrown off balance. I want to live my life that way. I'd love to live in a world that lived life that way. That when things are chaotic and crazy, that we have a maturity within us, a centeredness within us that helps us to find the highest and best response, a balanced response to whatever is going on around us. So, in closing, this idea of awakening spiritually is expanded and cultivated as we look at opportunities to embody those 4 limitless qualities, the qualities of compassion, of joy, of love, and equanimity. And we learn to embody and deepen into those if we will also pay attention to those near enemies that show up, that serve as blockages or obstacles in the cultivation of those qualities. So I hope that there's 1 or 2 ideas that have just stuck with you, whether it's the idea that, wow, the near enemy of joy is comparison or jealousy, or the near enemy of equanimity is indifference, or whatever it may be, that, that there's 1 or 2 ideas that you go, that's really helpful. I'm going to really pay attention to that and see how I can stretch and grow. And most of all, stay awake. Namaste.
Thanks for listening. Sunday services at 9 and 11 a.m. Inclusivity. It's worth the drive. Subscribe to our podcasts and download our free app for instant access to a wealth of spiritual teachings, services, and events.